Good afternoon. This is the moment of a seminar where usually you have a CEO in front of you and you're going to have to go through an opening speech. And I feel sorry for you about that. My name is Olivier Boutelis. I'm the Chief Executive of Accountancy Europe. And if you're lucky, you're going to get a good joke and a big message. And that's usually always the same thing. So I thought we would do something slightly different today. I thought we would do a quiz, okay? So I'm going to ask you questions, and I'll see how many hands up I get to see if you guys have a good answer, all right? And I'm going to start with an easy one. What is IFAC, an acronym? Who knows what the answer is? Raise your hands. It's not a lot of hands, actually. So I'm going to ask someone who doesn't raise, you didn't raise your hand. What is IFAC?
The International Federation of Accountants.
The International Federation of Accountants, one of the co-organizers of today's event. Now, more difficult, IPSASB. Can I ask you, Jan, maybe? Okay, well, let's give him a chance, right?
International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board.
And would you be the chair by any chance? All right, okay. So that was too easy one. I'm not going to ask you to count Europe on an acronym. Everybody should understand what it is. Okay. So we are in Brussels, and I will not offend anyone asking what the two letters EC mean. But I think we need to remember that today online, we've got 135 countries watching you people in this room. So maybe we should tell them what EC is. European Commission, right? And from the European Commission, we have
The European Commission is the executive arm of the European Union, responsible to prepare all the legislative proposals and to implement the European Union budget.
Thank you very much, Rosa. And ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard from the two keynote speakers that you will have today. So Jan Carew first, who's the chairman of the IPSASB, and Maria Rosa Aldea Busquet, who is the Deputy Director General of DG Budget in the European Commission. Now, moving on, maybe not an acronym this time, but a real question, because if I ask you what the IPCC is, I'm sure everybody will raise their hands. Or do I have false hopes? Uh-oh. So I'm going to ask a more difficult question. Who amongst yourself have read the IPCC report, not the big report, just the summary for policymakers? It's about 30 pages. It's about 10% of a normal corporate report, okay? So who has read the IPCC report, summary for policymakers? That was issued about, 2-3 weeks ago. Show of hands, please. Whoa. 1, 2.5, 2.5. So you didn't go up to the 30 pages, right? I understand that, Well, I would really strongly advise you, ladies and gentlemen, to read this report. Today, we're going to be talking about public sector sustainability. And if you don't read the IPCC report, you don't know what the problem we're trying to solve is. And how can we solve a problem we don't understand, right? So it is an easy read. It is a short read at the end of the day. It's only 30 pages. It is a little bit depressing, though, because once you have reached page 33, I think, or 34, you understand that the world is heading to a catastrophe, as the UN Secretary General said repeatedly. This is a message that we've heard for 25, 30 years now. And you know what? Things are not getting better. We've been signing, conventions, treaties. We've been reading, well, not all of you apparently, but some people have been reading reports, trying to understand what the problem is. And in the meantime, the problem is getting worse and worse. And we now have, according to the report and according to the UN Secretary General, a very short window of opportunity to fundamentally change the world, because that's what needs to happen now. And it so happens that in my capacity and in another capacity, I do spend quite a lot of time talking to scientists and CEOs who are willing to change, people who really want to change, but they can't. And very often the reason why they can't is that they're locked into a systemic trap. They are prisoners of the infrastructure and the system in which they operate. And who is leading, is designing this infrastructure primarily? Who is in charge of transport, energy, education, energy, mining, oil and gas, etc.? Who is dealing with that primarily? It is the public sector. Who in this old continent is basically representing more or less half of the spending, half of GDP? It is the public sector. And right now, we have had the strange idea that we were going to change the world by asking the private sector to do the job. And the private sector is locked into the systemic trap. And it is not going to be possible to change unless the public sector actually leads the way. And on that, I think we should really not forget that the public sector, is not only providing the policy framework, the tax framework, basically things that have been invented a good 100 years ago sometimes, but are shaping the way in which we do business, the way in which our society operates. It is not only that. It is also publicly owned companies. It is also local government. It is all these entities that basically shape the world and the infrastructure and the system in which companies and us citizens are operating. And we're dependent from that infrastructure. Therefore, it is very often what prevents change in the public sector. So I would like on that to commend actually the work that the IPSASB is doing to provide more transparency on what the public sector is doing on sustainability. But we need to ask the question, what is reporting at the end of the day? Is it the end of the story or is it the beginning of the story? I'm talking to a room where we probably have a good half of the room being accountants, right? Raise your hands, the accountants. I might be popular with this one than asking who read the IPCC report. Yeah, obviously, okay. So we accountants tend to think that reporting is the beginning and the end of the world. That's where everything starts. Not sure. To get a good report, you basically need to do the job first. So to report on your transformation, you basically need to do this transformation first. What actually Accountancy Europe is advising SMEs to do, I mean, you first have to change to be able to report on the change that you've made, right? But at the same time, let's not forget that transparency, reporting, is also telling the world what you've done and what you've not done. It is improving public accountability, something that also is important for the public sector. Reason why I was commending your work, Jan, and reason why I think everybody's looking forward to having you today as our first keynote speaker. And I think on that note, you will maybe answer the question, is it the beginning of the end? Thank you, Jan.
So thank you very much for that introduction, Olivier. I think you set the scene very nicely as to why we were here. And thank you very much to you and the team for inviting us here. Thanks also to IFAC who've helped organise today. I think you set the scene in terms of the importance of the public sector, and you've asked the question why, and also is it the beginning or the end? I think we'll leave that one to the end, and we'll see where we get to on that. I think maybe if I just start off with, and this is the first slide. You have the saying, a week is a long time in politics. Well, a year is actually an amazingly short time in accounting standards things. So next, please. Sorry, I have to do this manually. So just to remind you about how we've got to where we are today. And I think probably the one statistic that Olivier missed in his introduction was the significance of the public sector in the capital bonds markets 40% of that. And that was one of the statistics that the World Bank called out in its report last January, where they actually asked, they really reminded everybody about that important fact and the significance of that in terms of sustainability and why it was that sovereign governments should be interested in this. They called on us to actually enter the field and actually to lead a public consultation. So moving forward then from January forward to May last year, we launched the consultation on this, proposing that public sector did need guidance. IPSASB should lead on providing that, working in collaboration with GRI and IFAC, and where we should go first and how we should do that. September, we looked at the responses that we got into that alongside our Public Sector Standard Setters Forum, and I think it's fair to say that we got through the written consultation responses, but also through the roundtables that we held around the world. We got more or less unanimous support for the fact that the public sector did need its own guidance on sustainability reporting, and through the roundtables, that was 99% support for that, which is almost unheard of. But also public sector IPSASB's role in that. And building on that and the discussions that we had at the Standard Setters Forum in Portugal last year, all of then considered its response to that, and in December agreed to move forward with a scoping and research phase, but also reaffirming its role in leading in the public sector. And that's where we are at the moment. So what are we thinking about? How are we thinking about approaching this for the public sector? And that's really the core of what I want to talk about today, and where I think we hope to get sort of responses, reactions to how we're thinking about approaching this. So we can go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. So starting then from what was in that consultation paper, and I think probably the most important proposition here is going back to that 40% in terms of the global bond market. That certainly underlies that aspect to it, but it's not just financial, it's much broader than that. And if you're thinking about not only decision making but accountability in the public sector, then you're looking at a much broader multi-stakeholder model. And certainly that was what we proposed in the consultation paper. That got a lot of support, as well as that proposal that in moving forward, there shouldn't be just the public sector is different, therefore we're creating different guidance. It's actually building on what's already there, but actually making it work for the public sector. So that support for collaboration with IFAC and GRI. And then I think the other thing that we also put into the paper is the real importance of the linkage to those overarching national targets, whether those are sustainable development goals, Paris targets, all of those national targets. The public sector is a huge contributor to those, but it's not the whole story, and therefore the need for linkage through to how those national and international targets are actually being set and monitored. So that's the lens. That's, if you like, building on what we proposed in the consultation paper. Next slide, please. And this is where, in thinking about how we go forwards, this is not something that the board hasn't tackled already. When we were developing our conceptual framework, which very appropriately was approved here in the Parlement in Brussels in 2014, we were looking more widely even at that stage, because we were already in the final stages of developing our own guidance, looking at the broader reporting landscape of the public sector. So we already have at least a start point in terms of thinking about the issues, in terms of thinking about the scope and purpose of public sector financial statements. So not just decision making, but also accountability in terms of what the qualitative characteristics are of good financial information, what the reporting entity is, and how you might go about presenting that. So that's already there. And that really gives us that basis for moving forward, but also because we're looking at doing this through the activity of a single board, connectivity then with the financial reporting work. And I think you can see that starting to come through as really important, for example, in where IASB is going to go in terms of linking climate change reporting with financial reporting. We can do that in an integrated way within the board. So if we then think about, okay, well, that's set up our framework in terms of what we've had feedback and support from our stakeholders. We've got the conceptual framework. How do we move forward from that? Next slide. And this is where I think, the importance comes of the global baseline that the IFAC is working on, going back again to that significance in terms of global bond markets. That has to be an important start point. But in terms of the way in which the IFASB is developing that baseline, that will be necessary, but not sufficient for the public sector. So I think that does give us a start point in terms of thinking about what might the public sector need. But we're going to need more than that if we look at the public sector multi-stakeholder model. And this is where I think the guidance from GRI will come in. So next slide, please. Because I think when you look at the topic standards that are already there and the way in which there's a much broader view in terms of impact, then that's actually where collaboration with GRI is going to be really important in terms of thinking through how can that existing literature, which is already widely used in the private sector, but also we think amongst various types of public sector organisation, particularly SOEs, how can we actually use that, and how can we actually think about taking that forward, again using the conceptual framework lens in terms of thinking about cost-benefit reporting entity and so on. So that is the architecture which the board discussed in its March meeting, and that's what that thinking is what we will be using to shape the first project briefs for the 3 projects that we said we would scope back in December. So 2 projects developed from the IFASB projects, climate change and a general framework, but then also thinking about public sector aspects for natural resources. So those were the 3 start points, and we will use this framework for those. So if we can go to the final slide, please. So next steps. Clearly very much dependent on the ongoing dialogue and the building relationships, I would say, with both IFASB and GRI. Those are becoming very productive. We've set ourselves the target of deciding the way forward in our June meeting, so this is very much upcoming and important. In terms of if you like, the first project that we think we will lead with, I think climate change, we all know that's urgent. I think that's becoming the focus, whether you're talking about the current project that GRI has in that. In fact, IFASB is completing its first guidance in that area. That looks likely that will be the first in terms of the requirement in terms of implementation, and then the focus is getting from ISB. So that's the proposal. And then it's about actually getting this up and running, because not forgetting the fact that this is a startup for the public sector. We don't have the benefit of being able to consolidate in CDSB, IPSASB, and so on in the way that the IFASB has. So that securing the funding is still one of the issues that we're working on, and then getting the architecture right in terms of the various groups that we need to support us, particularly that multi-stakeholder sustainability reference group that we talked about in the consultation paper. So that is, if you like, how have we got to where we are, how are we thinking about it, and what should you expect to see from us over the next few months. And with that, I will hand back to Olivier.
Thank you very much, Jan. I don't know whether that's for you or for me, actually, but we shall see, right? And I'm going to take revenge on the forgotten statistics, actually, because I will better prepare next time. So thank you for hinting to that. I think it is an important point you're making. However, I think it would be great that we also all think about the positive externalities that the public sector produces. We're always obsessed these days, especially if you're an economist. How many economists in the room? Oh, that's a pretty good, I thought it would be full. So that's a good sign, actually. Economists these days are always obsessed with negative externalities, but for about 100 years, they've been trying to measure and re-internalize, etc., etc. The public sector is a machine to produce positive externalities, and we should not forget about that. However, there are also negative externalities in the public sector, and I think it is the example that I gave of preventing change in the private sector. We can ask people, you and me, to stop driving. We can ask them to change cars. But if we don't change our policies regarding roads and public transport, it won't be able to change. As simple as that. And in terms of leadership, in terms of leading national governments, some people describe my job as herding cats. I think there are worse jobs, far worse. It's herding the member states. And there's a body in this town a few hundred meters away from here whose specialty it is to herd cats and provide leadership to governments. This body is the European Commission. And we're now going to hear from you, Rosa. Thank you. You can be.
Hello, everybody. On your first question, if it's the sustainability reporting, it's the beginning or the end, I would like to say it's in the middle. And why I'm saying that? Because it's in the middle because sustainability reporting needs to report on something that has been put in place. And it's not the end because I hope that with this reporting, it will be a good input for the political decisions. And that is my theory that it's a good step to improve the future. Bon, good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to discuss on this topic of sustainability reporting. Together with digital transition, the green transition is a top priority for the European Commission. The green and digital transitions are our growth strategy as they will bring prosperity and stability that we are looking for. We have therefore devoted a lot of attention to this topic, sustainability, and of course on sustainability reporting, and we will continue to do that in the future. But before starting on this topic, I would like maybe to take a moment to look back on our permanent and fruitful cooperation with the IPSAS board, because Ian is here and also his colleagues. 20 years ago, the European Commission took an important decision to move to accrual accounting 20 years ago. It was in 2002 and go live in 2005. And it was decided that our accounting framework needs to be IPSAS standard. The Commission is an observer in the IPSAS board. I am a member of the CAC, the Consultative Advisory Group, that allows us also to participate and to give input to the IPSAS board and to have a very constructive collaboration. Being full IPSAS compliant, because the European Union is full IPSAS compliant, certified by the auditors, I don't know if they are here, the European Court of Auditors, has many benefits: transparency, on completeness, harmonization, accountability, and we can find other words. But for me, it's as accountant of the European Commission, it's very, very important. And to have this framework together with this clean opinion coming from the European Court of Auditors shows the reliability of our financial statements, and this increases our credibility and the public confidence that we enjoy as institution today. But now move to the sustainability. As I said, sustainability is a key priority for the European Commission, for the European Union. And as you know, the European Union is leading in the world on all the efforts to tackle the climate change and how we are dealing with that. We have put in a very ambitious targets. First, devoting at least 30% of our 21-27 budget, including Next Generation EU, really to climate change related activities. 30% of more than 2 trillion euros. Second target, reducing net greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030. The third target, reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. All of that is very ambitious. Achieving these targets require very large investments, as was said at the beginning, from both the public and private sector. The European Union budget and the national budget are also instruments to leverage private investment in this area. So the European Commission has recently strengthened the regulatory framework for listed companies to make sure that they produce reliable information that is important for the investors. But I suppose you are thinking, but what is the European Commission doing for its own budget? Because we have this ambitions or target of 30%. Over the past years, we have working a lot on that, and especially on the reliability and accessibility of the information on sustainability relevant goals, fighting climate change, protecting biodiversity, and enhancing gender equality. More recently, we are advancing on our contributions to the digital transition, and we are reporting on all these issues annually on the annual report on management and performance. It's a report that is key for us on accountability, on transparency. It's a key report that is integrated in what we call the integrated financial reporting. However, I have to recognize that it's not easy. It's very complicated. What we have done until now? First, we have established a consistent methodology to track the European Union budget contribution to tackling climate changes. And this methodology is based or very similar to the OECD methodology. But we have tried to go a little bit further. And now our methodology relies really on the expected effect instead of the intent approach base. We have done a step forward. Also, we have added the activity-based approach. It's another improvement that we have introduced to our methodology. And another key novelty that is also very ambitious is that the principle of doing no harm. What is that? Is that this requires that no measure financed by the European Union should have negative repercussions for the European Union environmental objective, and that our reporting needs to take into account. Then naturally, we move to a more difficult question. What does this money achieve? Because one thing is the intention, but we want to know what is the real achievements. And to answer this question, we have started developing a methodology to estimate the impact of the measure we are financing. This methodology will be first used to measure the impact of our Next Generation Green Bonds program. The Next Generation EU is our response to the COVID crisis. As you know, under this program, the European Union is becoming the biggest public issuer of green bonds. We will issue about 250 billion in 6 years. It's for this reason that the Commission is providing full transparency on allocation and impact of these generation green bonds. And we have published a framework that is based or aligned with the principles of the International Capital Market Association and has been assessed by the independent consultants. With this framework that we have established, we have already issued 42.5 billion in green bonds that they have been very well appreciated in the financial markets. But we have done a lot of more. In March 22, we have launched the Green Bond Dashboard. With this dashboard, we are tracking the planning expenditure. In December, we published the first EU Green Bond Allocation Report that we are confirming that the funds raised through the green bonds are really invested on sustainable activities. And by the end of this year, 23, we will publish the first impact report, which will provide an estimate of how much CO2 emissions will be avoided through the Recovery and Resilience Facility or through the Next Generation EU program. That is a lot of things that we are investing in these last years, but we are not stopping here. We would like that this impact report is also applied to the entire budget of the European Union. And we are working on this to publish what is the result, what is the impact on climate change and on the other areas of the European Union budget. But if you want that I am honest, it's difficult. And we are learning by doing, because there are not a lot of experience around the world. And I have to recognize that sustainability reporting in public sector is facing two particular constraints. And I think that needs to be taken into account. The first one, there are a lot, I would say only three. The first one is the scope. The scope in public sector is really very, very broad. As many other public institutions, through our budget, we found a very diverse range of activities, from agriculture to infrastructure, from satellites to innovation. And I can continue. And that needs to be taken into account. Secondly, is the multitude of actors implementing the public budget. As others, public sector, the European Union is not always in the first line on the implementation of the budget. Around 70–75% of our European Union budget is in fact implemented under our responsibility of the European Commission by the member states, by the agencies, by international organizations, by the financial institutions, etc. Consequently, in this framework, it's more complex to get complete information of our reporting and to get this information on time. Last but not least, we cannot impose a lot of burden, administrative burden, to our implementing partners, because if not, they will not be very interested to implement our European Union budget, and we want that they are implementing it. That means that we need to find a good balance between what is necessary to be reported to us to do the consolidated reporting and without creating a lot of work. It's true that it's a little bit the same process on the financial statements, because to prepare the consolidated financial statements, finance have also to receive a lot of information, but that has been put in place. Now we need to do the same on the sustainability report. To conclude, I would like to emphasize that I consider that it is essential to report on a transparent and reliable way on how much we dedicate to sustainability relevant topics and what is the impact of this financing. With this, I think we will continue to build trust and possibly to set an example for others' public administration. This is our commitment for the European Union budget. We are expectant on the project of the IPSASB board on sustainability reporting. I think, or I hope, it will bring a good framework, a lot of ideas, pertinent guidance for the public sector. And I'm happy to have the opportunity to contribute, to share our experience in order to have a very good sustainability report. And I'm very happy to be here and to hear from you on the discussions today. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Laura Lecker. I'm a principal at IFAC, who we now know as the International Federation of Accountants. I lead on our public sector to work, and I have the pleasure today of moderating our panel discussion. And thank you so much to our keynote speakers. Ian, I think your overview of the direction of the IPSASB and what you're doing in the space has been really helpful to set the context for the discussion. And Maria Rosa was listening with interest as to what you're doing in the European Commission. And I think some of the constraints and the challenges that you've outlined are going to come up in the discussion today. With that, I'd like to invite my panelists up to the front. If we could take a seat there. Yes, thank you. Before we get started on the discussion, just wanted to just set up some housekeeping. We've got about an hour for the discussion today, for the panel discussion, and then we want to leave time for questions afterwards. So we'll have about 20 minutes for questions. And for those of you in the room, please just raise your hand, and then someone will come with a roaming mic. For the online, and we have, I believe over 700 registered online, and as Olivia said, we have 135 jurisdictions represented, so really, really impressive on the global reach, and just shows, I think, the priority globally for this topic. But for those online, please type your questions into the Zoom chat, and we'll do our best to get through as many as we can. With that, I just wanted to kick off the discussion and really just introduce our panelists. I'm joined today by, I've got Alex Metcalf, who is the Global Head of Public Sector at the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, the ACCA. I have Elko van der Enden, who is the CEO of the Global Reporting Initiative. Also on stage, we have Vivi Niemann-Ma, the Secretary General of IPSASB Working Group on Environmental Auditing and Deputy Director at the National Audit Office of Finland. And then we also have Andrew Blasey, the Deputy Head of Division and Lead on Green Budgeting at the OECD. And then online, we are joined by Lebogang Sene, who is the Technical Director of the Pan-African Federation of Accountants, or PAFA. So welcome everybody, and thank you all for participating in today's discussion. I wanted to start off just with a round of introductory comments. So if you could, in 2 to 3 minutes, give us some sort of high-level perspectives on what you see as the need for global public sustainability reporting standards. And who would, I guess we start with Andrew, and we'll just work our way around. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here today from the OECD. We work on budgeting, public sector budgeting, and the real importance that comes through in our work with ministries of finance is that they are working to a common standard, but that the ex ante of understanding what is being allocated, the way in which prioritization is taking place, is occurring in a way that has sustainability, has climate, nature, and environment taken into account at that very beginning of the process. If it's not part of the objectives and part of the way in which decision making is taking place, it's very hard to then include it in the financial reports at the end. And it goes to what is the objective of the information that's being reported financially, but also what's meaningful in terms of the additional information that is relevant to financial reporting as opposed to sustainability generally.
Yes, hello, and thank you for the invitation as well. Just to kind of give a bit of the context, like where I come from and how I look at things. First of all, I come from a supreme audit institution and with performance audit background. And okay, I lead the working group on environmental auditing at INTERSCI. And then I also come from the Nordic context. So I think that all affects quite a lot on what I'm going to say. In the working group, we deal currently a lot with green economy and climate and biodiversity. And we've already heard like the importance of climate, and what I can tell from the WTA perspective is the next thing is biodiversity. And that's so much harder to kind of put into numbers. So that's really a challenge. we looked in the working group at sustainability reporting in 2013. At that time, I have to say there wasn't that much happening, except maybe at the UK then. And we recommended supreme audit institutions to keep an eye on the development. And now it feels like the time is ripe to again, like really get like study more detailed what's happening in reporting field. And once the regulation starts to be there, that's of course like when also the supreme audit institutions have to get ready to audit them. So currently the project on reporting, it's led by the supreme audit institutions of Thailand and Indonesia. And I'm particularly happy about that, like because I feel like this discussion has been quite a lot like Anglo-European discussion. So it's great to have this more like a global perspective. So so I think one of the really the key things is to develop something that's globally relevant.
Without taking the public sector into account. To repeat myself, long overdue. You cannot build a global baseline on sustainability reporting, financial and without taking, what is it, 30-40% of your GDP into account. It's also about credibility towards business, why they and why not the others. So we are fully supportive of this initiative. Hearing and confirming what you say, we just returned from a 2.5-week trip in the Asian region. Regulators are very keen on this project and are following it very closely. So it indeed has a global scale, also in Latin America, by the way.
Excellent. Yeah. So from my perspective, from the ACCA, the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, we bring together the view of around 500,000 students who are going through becoming professional accountants around the world, and around 250,000 bar members as professional accountants. Is that better, Cecile? Yeah, very good. And with that global body, where most of those are actually not based in the UK anymore, we have a very international footprint. I think what's come through really clearly from all of our engagement is the importance that we see in creating a global baseline now, and doing that in a way that is specific for the public sector. So it's been exceptional to see what I see as significant progress on the private sector side over the last year and a half or so. I think particularly if we put the kind of the perspective of standard setting and international standard setting, it's difficult to do that at pace, and I think really impressive and worth acknowledging that that's happened in the private sector. And I think this is now a really important conversation for us on how we turn the lens to the public sector, make use of what we can from the private sector and what's been done, but translate that into something that's fit for purpose for the public sector. And I can say very much that the ACCA and many of the partners that we work with see this as a devoted and key area for us in the months ahead.
Thank you, Alex. Lebo, again, can I turn to you online?
Greetings to everybody. My apologies that I could not be there in person. So I am with the Pan-African Federation of Accountants as introduced. And really, we see ourselves as the regional organization for the accountancy profession. And we seek to our vision is to see a value creation to benefit citizens of Africa. And so when we look at the movement, not only in the public sector, but certainly the private sector, as it relates to sustainability, we really do welcome this move. And of course, as Alex has said, the speed at which it has moved. It's important to really acknowledge that, from an African continent perspective, sustainability reporting is probably still very new for a lot of our countries.
I think I'm going to kick off, Alex, with you, and talking about the need for public sector specific, and I think that message has come across quite clearly. So, just from your perspective, what do you think should be the focus of public sector sustainability reporting? Who are the users? What information do they need?
Great. Yeah, thank you, Laura. So to help kind of inform this question, we actually, in advance of today, brought together a global group of experts. It was 21 experts from 15 jurisdictions, specifically asking about the focus of public sector sustainability reporting. I'm quite happy to actually say that today we published a policy brief that then summarizes that discussion. And in asking kind of two core questions of what you've just shared there, Laura. One, who are the users? From the perspective that we heard from this group of 21 experts, both covering financial reporting and sustainability experts, they were coming back telling us that very much the existing conceptual framework from the IPSASB board was largely fit for purpose. Really good news to hear that, to talk about both service recipients and resource providers as the right kind of scope for the users that we'd be looking to for sustainability reporting. And I think even just for the sake of urgency and from what we heard earlier today from Olivier, that's already just a great green light to start our discussion on public sector sustainability reporting. Alongside that, though, I think an interesting point that came out of the discussion was the degree to which there was interconnectedness within the public sector, and how that interconnectedness could then result in specific public sector entities, in some ways acting as users for other entities that are reporting as well. So I think it's really bringing a systems thinking approach to this that's going to be really important, and maybe some kind of extension that comes from the conceptual framework as a result there. So if we take that as a bit of a given in terms of who the users are, and I hope others can come in and provide some views on this. I think the natural next question is, what are the information needs of these users? And one thing that we heard really from almost everyone, this was a fairly universal view, was the fact that there is, of course, this wide user base, but the unique feature of the public sector is that it has the policy making and regulatory authority. And with that authority comes a great deal of power to try and shape our response to issues of net zero, also to other sustainability objectives that can be led by the public sector. And I think that actually, in terms of the information needs, which will lead to more of our discussion, means that we are going to have a degree of impact reporting, and potentially looking to the GRI and others in how we incorporate that impact reporting. I think in saying that, it's of course going to be very important that we have financial materiality included here. That will be of interest and clearly be relevant. But the strong call that came through the group that we brought together has said that impact reporting must be a core feature of making this fit for the public sector. I think the last thing that I'll say, and then happy to hand back to Laura on this particular question, was some interesting discussion we had around differential reporting within this area, because I think what we heard already in our introductory remarks is the concern around scope and making this the balance of relevance, but also what could be a serious industry within the sector in terms of the capability to produce these reports. And some of what we were hearing in this, and it wasn't a universal view, but was that we should have a difference between what we're reporting, where we try to maximize the relevance of a particular entity, where they're reporting on what is relevant to them and where they can actually have an influence, and comparing that to the areas in which you'd see that standardization, and then the other side, you see how you'd be going about reporting. That's where we'd look to see standardization. Sorry, that didn't make perfect sense. We're looking to standardize how we go about reporting, not what we report on. That's the bottom line point there. So there's a lot more insights in that policy brief. There's 6 different recommendations there, but a bit of an overview there for you, Laura, to support everyone today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. And I think that's helpful, I guess, as a basis for the discussion going forward. I'm going to try one more time online to Leva again. I think maybe 4th, 5th time lucky.
Fantastic. Okay, so now I need to ask you again, which part of the question am I answering now? Do I go back to where I was?
So it was just on sort of a 2 minutes on just your high level views on the need for the sustainability reporting guidance.
So I will be brief and say we absolutely, from a PAFA perspective, absolutely support the move towards developing standards that will support sustainability reporting. What I wanted to highlight, though, is that, from an African perspective, in our continent, a lot of countries are only getting used to or getting familiar with the concept of sustainability reporting. And so to that end, I think it's important that whatever standards come out of the IPSASB should be, and I'll use the word scalable, for lack of a better word, to allow governments to provide information that we have while they build up the capacity to provide more detail. And I also wanted to just highlight the importance of how when we think about probably from a different context, sustainability and looking at it from the ESG perspective, that for Africa, social and governance issues are at a crisis level. So they're equally urgent. It's equally urgent to address those as it is to address the E factors. I'll stop there for a minute, Laura. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Zebra. And I think we'll get back to that a bit later on in the discussion, and absolutely agree. If we're setting a global baseline, it needs to be applicable in both a developing and a developed context. And so I think we'll get into some of the practicalities as of that later on in the discussion. But I just want to take it back now in terms of, and again, thinking about what's specific about the public sector. And I'm going to turn to Vivi. There's a lot of sustainability guidance that's been developed for the private sector, and as Ian said in his introductory comments, of course, they'll take what has already been produced and see how we can, or how they can adapt that, or as necessary in a public sector context. But I think it is important to get that public sector angle in there, because I think it's safe to say that as they are, these frameworks are insufficient for the public sector. So what else does the public sector reporting framework need to consider? And is it clear just how sustainability reporting is understood in the public sector context?
Yes, thank you. I think like one of the things is like, what is actually the entity that reports? So that could be understood in a very different ways. Like, one way to consider it is like the information that we have on society, on environment in the first place, like coming from the environmental field, like environmental accounting, natural resource accounting, like that could be considered sort of pieces of sustainability reporting as well. And then the reporting that government makes on its like performance, key performance indicators, its impact. Like that, a whole of government level reporting, like, is that sustainability reporting? Like, for instance, I know that in Finland, like government reports or the annual report has an annex on performance and impact, and it includes also sustainability and the SDGs. So that could be considered like sustainability reporting as well. But I guess like what everyone here thinks or considers useful is then this entity level reporting as a ministry or agency in a similar way as a private sector. But I think that is also something that people can easily how would I say, talk past each other if they understand it differently. And maybe one more element that has brought absolutely like a big boost to sustainability reporting are the SDGs, like certain United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but at the same time, they might have also complicated a little bit of the reporting landscape, because some want to report on the SDGs, some more of the like old school sustainable development. And again, like referring to a Finnish case, like State Treasury has made a kind of guidance how ministries and agencies could report on based on the SDGs. But then there are some who think like, no, we don't want to use the SDGs. We want to talk about sustainable development and 3 pillars and so on. So, but just one thing that I want to mention on the SDGs is that they have been quite good at sometimes, or I see some reporting on also the global impacts. So I think what's not so typical for governments necessarily is, I mean, they tend to look at their own actions and kind of remain inside their own borders as long as you don't go to the development aid. But SDGs might have helped to look the impacts, these global spillovers that you have. So that's definitely something that's useful there. But it's indeed this different understanding on reporting affects how people see what should be reported. And in my experience, like, people can talk about very different things in this context.
Yeah, thank you so much for. I think it's a great point to remember. Again, in terms of even just the global issues that we're dealing with, and actually, and that's why again this global baseline is so important to have that comparability. These are global issues that we're dealing with, and particularly when you look at it from a public sector perspective as well. And I think you've just highlighted just how complex the reporting environment is in the public sector as well, and that's going to be vary by jurisdiction clearly. But I guess the risk then is similar to in a private sector context in the fragmentation risk. And maybe Elko, if I can turn to you, in the private sector, there are many different developing frameworks related to sustainability. But as we know of now, there's no internationally recognized public sector reporting framework that exists. But are there any lessons learned from the private sector that you think might help ensure better coordination across the different sustainability initiatives? And I know Ian said at the start that that IPSASB are going to be engaging closely with the ISSB and of course GRI as well.
Well, first of all, have rock solid procedures around appointments of people that have to cooperate with other organizations that you deal with. That's a lesson I learned very recently. That's one. Secondly, it is all about basically data and transformation. And that set in a landscape that not many people are very familiar with. And then looking from a theoretical point of view, it's the difference between the standard and the framework. What is a rating and a ranking? What does it mean? The questions we very often get is, why GRI? Now there is TCFD. Or in this case, Emmanuel of ISSB Faber, why should you use ISSB when there is ESRS? So first, full understanding of the landscape and where the players within the landscape, that's one. Secondly, to indeed be able to step over your own shadow and accept that there are different views and different visions on certain topics, whether they are financial impact or just impact on the societal effects. Respect each other's views on this. They are not opposing factors, they are complementary. That's how you should see it. That is basically also the basis of the relationship we have with the ISSB. It's not that you have to choose from one, they're complementary. That's very important, I think, to understand. The third one is think supply chain. It's not very easy to set a standard. It is damn hard work. I did one myself, 207 on tax. But that is relatively easy, even to fully appreciate what the effects of your standards are on an entire supply chain, on the suppliers of the services and goods of, in this case, public sector. If they need to provide information on scope 3 or whatever, do they have the capabilities in doing so? And if yes, at what cost? So when it comes to the scope 3 element in the standard setting, think about reverse engineering. First, look what the capabilities are in the market of some of the important players, for example, small, medium enterprises that need to deal with this. If you cannot convince them to provide it information, if the quid pro quo is not there, it will be very difficult. And last but not least, some personal experience when it comes to public sector. Not everyone likes change and likes to work from a known process. Change is scary. And that means that you have to get the people on board and make them understand very early already in the journey what is at stake, and that it will not cost the people that work with it their jobs, or something very nasty will be happening. So I can go on, but I think these are the most important.
Yeah, thank you. I can see the IPSASB writing notes down there. I think definitely taking some of those lessons learned there. I want to turn to Andrew next, and we've heard a lot about sustainability reporting in the private sector being driven by capital market needs, and Ian said up front, and Olivier as well, that sovereign debt makes up a significant amount of capital market activity. I think that the statistic quoted was 40%. But that's not necessarily where the demand comes from in the public sector. So I guess my question to you is, why do you think there has not been more demand from capital markets, given the size of the bond market and for public sector sustainability information?
Thank you. It's a great question, and one that I've struggled with in a way, because when asking why has there not been more demand, it's hard to say why has there been so much demand. When we look at the figures of the issuance of sustainability bonds and green bonds. And so it's a case of, in a way, being careful not to underestimate that demand that's out there. Because I think the access to understanding that demand, in a way, depends on the audience we have. If we were here with debt management issuers, we would hear a lot more about demand than, say, we might do with policy advisors. With that, it sort of highlights too that there are many users, as we know, of these of financial statements, and investors is one, but policy advisors and policy developers are another. And it does show, I think, how with government, as we've heard from other speakers, it is disaggregated, it is decentralized, it is of multiple entities that all have components of the information, and there isn't necessarily a perfect system that brings that all together. A consolidated report is nice, but actually the way in which it is produced, it's not from just one source. And I think we see that too from an investment perspective, where is a nationally determined contribution ambitious? Does it have a localized strategy to show then which areas or which sectors are going to be prioritized by government, or where investment will be channeled? These are things that are important signals to investors, as they are to policy advisors and to our governments in terms of elected officials as to what's being done. One of the things that we work with in terms of the OECD on green budgeting and on sustainability, climate, environment, is overcoming the perception that for some reason sustainability issues are separate from the budget, as though there is some allocation of expenditure or revenue that's different from the rest of health expenditure, social transfers, or education expenditure. When in actual fact, it is about integrating these considerations into the main budget itself, and so therefore into financial reports itself. But going back to your point about the demand and the interest from capital markets, is that if climate is integrated into macro fiscal forecasts, then understanding is there an effect in out years becomes relevant to that investor. In the same way that if it's included in fiscal risk management frameworks, then understanding what is the exposure is relevant to the investor. And that flows through to appraisal for the selection of projects, monitoring and evaluation, and then to financial reporting in the end as well. So why is there not more demand? I mean, I think one of the things to congratulate the organisers of today's event is it's a sign of the demand that is out there, because we're actually discussing it. And one of the things that I think is likely to prompt that demand further is a little bit of supply, so that there is something to respond to and to continue that process and evolution of improvement in the relevance to investors. And that's certainly, in terms of green budgeting, something that is key to what the OECD's work is in this area.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I think clear message. I think from the start of the session on in terms of the demand, and like you say, just the engagement in this event shows that the demand and the interest. I guess it now gets down to the practicalities, and I think in order to move forward, is how do we facilitate a move to sustainability reporting in the public sector, and what are some of the particular issues for the public sector? And I want to turn, if I can, to Lebo again. Just, you mentioned in your opening about the constraints, and we always hear that in a public sector context, and especially when it comes to reporting, the public sector will always face constraints in terms of capacity, resources, human, IT, financials. So what are your thoughts on how to manage this, and particularly from your perspective in Africa?
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks,
Um,
Laura.
You know, for me, I think that as much as we're talking about reporting from a public sector, we need to recognize that success requires collaboration from areas of the economy, right? And I think it's obviously well understood, or it's well accepted that the private sector probably has a lot more resources and skills and knowledge. So I think it's important to, I'm getting such feedback. I hope it's clearer, and I apologize for those online that are also experiencing the same thing. I think what's important is to have collaboration opportunities where the government can facilitate collaborations between the public sector entities to promote shared learning, but also the concept of partnerships with the private sector will come in very, very handy to help create those capacity that the capacity needs. It's also important to articulate, the benefits of sustainability reporting. I think that once it is seen as a part of, let's say, service delivery, it'll probably be easier to buy into making sure that as part of our day-to-day sustainable actions, we're collecting the data that is needed for reporting, as an example. I think there's just one more point that I would like to also highlight is the importance of prioritizing. I think prioritization just also means that from, again, talking to the point of not having everything readily available, we can start slowly. It's important to start slowly with collecting. For example, I think Elko mentioned data and transformation. You start collecting data and reporting on what you do have, and ultimately building up will also just advance that concept of building capacity. Thank you, Laura.
And apologies for the feedback that you're receiving online. I think just building on that, maybe if I can turn to Vivi and just think about, are there some particular issues in the public sector sustainability reporting that we need to consider from a practical perspective?
Yeah, well, first of all, there are some obvious things like wording, like this business language, and so which can be sometimes like very strange from the public sector perspective. But that's maybe just something minor. But there are some maybe more fundamental issues. I would come back to this this question of entity, like if we talk about that the reporting entity would be like, let's say, Ministry of Agency or something. And if we look at like one of the problems with like many governments is the siloed structure, and which is of course good for accountability. Definitely, it's good that there are clear responsibilities, but at the same time, it's not necessarily very good for policy coherence, or there might be issues related to that. And here we could talk about like horizontal policy coherence between the sectors, but also like vertical policy coherence between the government levels. So then, if we like stick with this entity level reporting, then the question like how, like, does it kind of make us think only like internally inside the organization, and what about the big like whole of government or whole of society level that's there in the public sector? It's like these entities are not for themselves, but they are for the bigger structure. So how to kind of deal with that. And there are also, like, if we think of like issues at the public sector, there are also certain trade-offs, and sometimes these trade-offs are also like between the sectors. And that's one of those topics. Like, I think this is much more straightforward in the private sector compared to the public sector. So I think this makes it a tiny bit of more complicated. Maybe coming back to the sustainable development goals, like one like a promising thing there has been like if you try to look at the interlinkages, we, for instance, experimented at the INSA working group on environmental auditing with this cross-impact analysis between the SDGs, like where you try to recognize these like possible synergies, but also like trade-offs and conflicts. And those are then, of course, maybe the topics where the auditors could pay attention to. And I mentioned earlier this biodiversity, those are kind of twin prizes, but there are also like some tensions between them. So ideally, it would be good that the climate measures wouldn't jeopardize like biodiversity targets, and that's something that we are currently also working on with WGA. But this kind of like policy coherence perspective, I think that's one that's more challenging in the public sector compared to private one.
I don't know if any other panelists have any thoughts on the policy coherence report. I think that came up in the roundtable discussion that I know that you ran as well, Alex.
Sure, I could speak to that briefly. I think it's a really important point within the public sector context, is that you have many different entities and actors here. I think in the end, we are operating with trade-offs. This too, aren't we? Oh, is that better? Can you hear me? Okay, good. So what I said at the beginning was, yes, I very much agree that policy coherence is a core feature of what we should be thinking about within sustainability reporting. And in the end, though, we are talking about trade-offs, though, too. And I think that the trade-offs that I imagine the IPSASB board is now facing is one between comparability and relevance as well, right? So you are going to have to be thinking about how you structure a framework or guidance or possibly standards that can find a happy median in that. And it is something, I guess I'll be a little bit more contentious in this and push a little bit and say, I think there are many private sector organizations now, though, who are quite complex as well. Maybe they have a shorter list of users within the sustainability space, but I think there's a vast array of operations you might have within a global conglomerate, for example, and you'd have to look at how you consolidate that up. So maybe there's more parallel than we might think to start there. But maybe the complication actually comes down to the level of objectives instead. So it's where a Ministry of Education might be focused on some aspects that you see something playing out differently for the Ministry of Environment, as the quick example for you. But I do think, that maybe there's hope for us in how we achieve policy coherence.
Thank you, Alex. I don't know, Andrew, did you want to say anything? No.
Yeah, I think it's well, both are really great points on the trade-offs and the coherence. I think there's a point in here too about the lessons of what we've learned so far in our work in this area. And I mean, we are in a way, when talking about climate change outcomes, this is one outcome of many that governments work towards. So there might also be gender equality, there might also be well-being frameworks and outcomes. And many of these have been brought into policy and reporting, performance reporting, performance measures, things that are informing the financial information. And so the way in which these outcomes and these frameworks have been implemented provide a way to look at what's relevant for sustainability reporting and green, in that much of the machinery and required for this in terms of changing financial systems to allow for what is the additional variable, what is the non-financial information that should be associated with it. Some of that work's been completed and exists not universally, but some countries have a good example of it. Others are in the process of developing it. And with that actually helps with what is the challenge, being able to frame the way in which we're thinking about how to operationalize the standards that we're talking about today.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Elko, I don't know if you want to comment.
Yes, something that I see in private sector happen. Then business, they file a report, so they're sitting on top of very useful data, but they do nothing with them. So then what to do with the data you collected and you put out in the open, and then what's next? So underuse of the investment. Secondly, something you also typically see is that it's not measured what the effects are of that what you try to achieve with your report, whether it's on climate, human rights, indigenous people, safe workplace. So what have the effects indeed been on the work floor, on the climate, etc., etc., etc. Get a far bigger buy-in if you also can show that. I know it's difficult. And last but not least, also in the private sector, I just had an interview with Responsible Investor. That was again, unfortunately, on the tax topic. That is now quite a hot thing in the US. I said, well, it's not so much about what you report, but also on why you do not report on other things. NGOs are more interested in organizations that do not report their tax data than on businesses that do and have to report. Why? Because apparently something is wrong there, because otherwise they would have reported. That is a very, very strange psychology, but something I think you should really think about before going on this journey with a specific part of the organization in embedding this and making this happen.
Thank you so much. Just conscious of time, and I just want to allow plenty of time for questions. But if I could just ask all of the panelists just to sum up in sort of 1 to 2 minutes, when thinking about public sector sustainability reporting standards, guidance, what does success look like to you? And maybe if I can start online with Lebergang for that one, and then I'll take individual comments.
Fantastic. Sorry, I got cut off. I think I was frozen for a little bit. But for me, success looks like standards that are fit for purpose, standards that allow governments to not take their time, but rather to follow them in a way that is effective for what is available. Success is standards that are also reflective of various priorities. So granted, I recognize the capacity challenges that the IPSASB would have, but standards that really resonate with their users, whether developed or developing. Thank you.
Thank you. Success, I mean, the hardest question to ask, right? But one of the big areas of focus for us at the OECD is on the quality of institutions. So we know what, or we think we know what a budget represents. If we were to ask, if I was to follow Olivia's start and ask questions about what is a budget, we would know that there's a sort of commodity of what we understand a budget to be. And with that, have worked to now understand what is a green budget in terms of integrating climate considerations into the budget process. In the same way, I think there's been great strides taken in we all know what a bond is in terms of a sovereign bond gilt, and now there's been a lot of developments on frameworks about understanding what is a green bond to the extent that markets have confidence in it by understanding what it is and what money is going into it. So in terms of the standards and success, it's actually peering back a little bit and saying, if we all know what a financial report is, well, if we meet again in a year's time, we know what a sustainability financial report is. So before jumping to the standard, if we could just have agreement on the commodity, then I think the quality of the institution that we're then building upon would be in great stead. Thank you.
Thank you. Vivi?
Yeah, I mean, framework that's clear and kind of simple. Keep it simple. That's always like a message that we have in the working group. Like if we do, let's say, a collaborative audit or something, or someone asks advice, like keep it simple, but something that leaves enough like somehow flexibility to these maybe national differences and yeah, specific elements. And yeah, why am I talking so much about the SDGs now? I don't know. If we think like Agenda 2030, like if you want to connect the reporting to that, they are like really global targets. So I think there should be also something maybe about the global impact, and that might be, of course, like very challenging, and I don't know whether that's in line with keeping it simple, but somehow I'd wish to see that. And then earlier there was talk about the IPCC report and the summary for policymakers. If you can't read it, look at even the pictures, like the graphs. They are just amazing. Like if you look them through, like you know so much more. And so sometimes I like wonder, could we have some framework like for visualizations, like put this and this and this in, and then we have the message, like it's really this pictures and visual information what we need today, not so much words. Right? Thanks.
Thanks, Vivi, and to the IPSASB colleagues. A diagram is needed. Elko, what does success look like to you?
If we are fully aware and understanding that we do this for the users of the reports and not for ourselves. So if they are happy, we are happy, and then you have defined, I think, success.
Thank you. Alex?
I think that's a great summary. But maybe what I'd add to that is acting with urgency as well. I think we heard from Olivier at the beginning that there is something of a 6-year window for us to try and make change here. I've been really impressed with what you put up, Ian, earlier on in terms of the progress to date, but there's a lot of work to do to make all of this come together. So acting with urgency, and I think also maybe something of a North Star for us is achieving accountability. I'm amazed that actually we ran a whole panel and we didn't say greenwashing in the entire thing. So I think that there's something here too of turning what could be just positive news stories, something that almost resembles marketing, and turning it into something that actually delivers decision useful information that produces change.
Thank you so much, Alex. Lots of great insights, but wanted to make sure we had left plenty of time for questions. So I guess I now open it up to the room. And if you're in the room and you have a question for our panelists, please just raise your hand and Dave will come over with the mic. I can see quite a few questions coming online as well. And Cecile, I know, is monitoring that one too. So yes, over to you. And just like, please, could you introduce yourself to the panelists? Thank you.
Of course. Thomas Müller-Markesberger. I'm the current chair of the IPSASB Consultative Advisory Group. First of all, thanks for the great insights, for the great presentations. Probably more a remark than a question, and it's based on Elko's remarks regarding cooperation, being open to viewpoints of others. I think that's very, very important. And I'm glad to hear that we are not kind of going into competition, because that is not helpful at all. There is just one word to save, one problem to solve, and that's where we need to work together. So you used the word complementary. I think that's good news from a standard setter point of view, but I think probably that's bad news from a preparer's perspective, because being complementary means that there are kind of separate set of standards, and the question for preparers in the end will be, what set of standards do I follow in order to be compliant with what? So it's not to be solved now, but I think that's certainly something which we should have in mind when we kind of think about setting standards for reports, whatever report will be in the end. Which standards should the preparer follow? I think that's not easy, and that's complementary could be rather scary.
Andreas Bergman, I'm a professor of public finance and predecessor of Ian Carruthers as IPSAS board chair. I would like to ask a question perhaps to the panelists. I mean, how do you see the relationship between sustainability reporting and sustainability, financial reporting? Andrew used that term, and the other panelists used sustainability reporting. So in my view, this is a very interesting question. When we actually decided about the conceptual framework 200 meters from here, we had in mind general purpose financial reports. And this includes sustainability financial reporting in my view, but it's still financial. So I mean, that's the question I would like to raise, because governments obviously produce a lot of reports just about sustainability. I mean, about water supply, about carbon dioxide emission, etc. So, but what is the relationship between those and general purpose financial reports that Rosa has explained?
Take us to that one first.
And that also is a good question that combines the previous question, because you have to look at what the objective of the standard is. What is the target group that you try to reach? Or what effect? When it's financial information, and I'm from the private sector, it is on behalf of investors, capital markets, to make calculable decisions on financial impacts. When you look at the standards that do with impacts themselves, it's about informing investors and society on the impacts businesses have while pursuing their strategic objectives on the environment and socioeconomic cohesion and topics. So they are in fact two sides of the same coin. That's exactly what I mean with complementary, because the best way would be you would have one standard that combines them both, and then you're more in the direction of an integrated report, the IRC that basically GRI founded. And that's why alignment between the two is so incredibly important. When you look at definitions, for example, when you look at work programs, when you look at the on-take of the standards on benchmarking, etc. Personally, I do think that it is extremely hard in current political environment to sell sustainability as a topic with a financial impact on behalf of the reporter only. Because it's also the group of stakeholders outside financial communities that are interested. Personally, I see the impact reporting as a form of longer-term risk management, because in the end, it will also always trickle down and translate into the financial effects on the organization. Assume issues like safe workplace or equality, equal pay. If you, whether you're private or public organization, do not take care with those issues, you will face problems either for litigations in due time, you will not find proper staff in the future, you will have issues in being able to meet your own strategic objective by lack of staff, etc., etc. That's not a direct effect on your bottom line or financial, but it will have an effect anyhow. And if you then look at investors with a horizon of 20, 30 years, especially the larger institutional investors, they see it as integrated part of their risk management strategy that will in the end always have an effect on the amount invested and the yield. So that's what I mean with complement.
Thank you. I think the alignment point is a great point as well. And the benefit here is that you have the standard setup for financial reporting, standard in the public sector, now looking at sustainability. So I think that alignment, absolutely. And I think Alex said it at the beginning, and I think Ian, in your remarks as well on the conceptual framework and actually using what's already there and what the IPSASB has already developed and then applying that in a sustainability context is helpful. Any other questions in the room? I think we're going to go to Cecile with some online questions. Thank you.
Yes, we have actually lots of questions from our online participants, and many of them are welcoming the initiative and referring to the global nature of the standards. So I trying to, maybe group some of them together. We have over 12, 13. So maybe let's try to group them into 5 lots. Maybe I will read them out, all of them together. Easier like that. So how will IPSAS, IFAC, INTESAI ensure that Africa's 54 countries government buy in this initiative, considering that Africa usually lags behind? Are there existing engagements with Africa? First one. Then, do you think that the role of accountancy is well understood in public sector? In my country, Ethiopia, we're working hard with climate resilience actors for climate resilience, but shortages of budget. What does the panel think about scalability of the standard for subnational level, for example, regions and municipalities? Feedback from the sustainability reports should be, in theory, connected to budget allocation or other fiscal decisions. What would be this channel of linking sustainability reporting to green budgeting? How should the reporting entity be delimited, considering that even today there is no homogeneity in the definition of the reporting entity at the financial statement level due to the institutional arrangements in each country? External sustainability assurance is developing very quickly in the private sector. What is the state and future of sustainability assurance in the public sector? And who should be responsible for driving it? And the last one, how would a public sector entity embed sustainability for success in delivery, in service delivery?
Yeah, I think, yeah, there are enough questions there for another panel discussion. Maybe if I start with question one on the Africa, and maybe if I can turn to Lebergang, who's in Africa and representing the Pan-African Federation of Accountants, to take that one, and then we'll go through some elements. And Cecile, we may need you to repeat, but thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Certainly, one of the PAFA strategic initiatives is influencing the development, adoption, and implementation of international standards. And we've actually started a conversation with the African Union, recognizing that the policy makers are part of the African Union, to bring to their awareness, because I think we take it for granted that the subject is well articulated, it's well understood, but our view is that we need to actually raise a lot of awareness at a policymaker level to ensure that Africa is actually not left behind. So from a PAFA perspective, we are certainly working through the African Union to make sure that our policymakers are aware of the move to enhance sustainability reporting. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. Never again. There was a question on scalability of the standards. I don't know. Alex, you mentioned differential reporting and some.
I imagine this overlaps with the question on subnational applicability too, right? Is that, yeah. So I'm also coming from a professional accountancy organization, which would take the view that yes, this should be relevant to subnational. It'd be unfortunate if you limited the view that would be only central government. I think there's a lot of discussion, and rightfully so, on getting the entity right and thinking about what reporting requirements might sit at a whole government level compared to what you would require of a particular entity, or even a particular program, was something that we were hearing back in some of our discussions during the Global Roundtable, where if you have a program on, let's say, biodiversity conservation, maybe the most important facet for that is impact reporting, right? It's not going to be what's the impact of climate change adaptation and mitigation on a conservation program. It's, did you achieve your program objectives? What's the impact that you've had? If you look at a ministry level, then you're probably going to be starting to look at both at that point. So I do hope that there's a way to incorporate this, but one of the last things we heard from Vivi too is, let's not make this too complicated. So speaking of trade-offs, this is going to be quite the enterprise. But I'm very much looking forward to what comes out the other side.
Yeah, just to continue that this like a role of local authorities, I think it's quite a good example of the differences between countries and even in Europe. And let's say now, talking about my perspective, like in Finland, local authorities are very strong and we just can't audit them. And the situation is totally different in many other countries. So that's actually a good example of the differences, which then of course affects also reporting. Yeah.
There was also a question on the link to green budgeting, which I'm looking at Andrew for that one. I know, Cecile, if you could repeat that question, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So feedback from the sustainability reports should be, in theory, connected to budget allocation or other fiscal decisions. What would be this channel of linking sustainability reporting to green budgeting?
Let me just say the question back. I'm not sure I heard it. Sorry, just at this end of the room. So what is it asking what is the feedback loop from sustainability reporting into budget allocations? Excellent, thank you. Look, great question, because at a aggregate level, financial reports are the feedback loop into the budget and how it's being spent. But one of the challenges with the budgeting process is that it doesn't mean that what was received last year is going to be what's received next year. In theory, there are some fixed constraints as to why there is some certainty around the fact that a budget allocation will continue to the next year. But in actual fact, there's lots of programs within a ministry's budget that may stop or start or be scaled up or be only pilots, or that says that the feedback loop from financial reports may in themselves be insufficient to influence what is going to be the appropriation that's put forward to Parliament for the coming year. And it relies on additional information that may be outside of financial reports, but should still contain information on sustainability in terms of having green integrated into the budget process. So I think it's absolutely crucial that there is the feedback loop there, and that it is connected with sustainability in the same way that we're working to support countries in how they integrate climate into and nature and environment into the budget process, but it may require more than financial statements alone for that. Thanks.
There was a question on the sustainability assurance and who should drive it. If you could just repeat that one, and then
yes,
to Vivi.
The question on sustainability assurance is external sustainability assurance is developing very quickly in the private sector. What is the state and future of sustainability assurance in the public sector, and who should be responsible for driving it?
So I guess my answer is very boring. Once it becomes a legal requirement, and those responsible of that start to report, then it comes to the table of supreme audit institutions.
I guess the other feature of that, though, is the capacity of supreme audit institutions to provide that assurance is going to be the really interesting part of the discussion. And with the title of what we're talking about today, if we're equipping the public sector for sustainability action, I think there's probably, I'd say, a lot of work for supreme audit institutions to do to be able to provide that level of assurance, and then maybe actually support that feedback loop as well, Andrew.
Thank you. So you have more questions?
Yes, we still have two more. So the first one is, how will the sustainability perspective and values of indigenous people and their governments be considered by different jurisdictions and by IPSASB? I think a direct question there.
Well, I could say shortly in environmental policy field and climate field, there's a discussion on traditional knowledge, which is quite important. We are about to study that, but have just in beginning of the process. But if we think of like challenge of climate change, we need all possible information that's available, and this so-called traditional knowledge could be very useful source of information as well, which we absolutely should not neglect.
A small suggestion, GRI has a wonderful standard on indigenous people already for years. Have a look at that one. Of somehow it can be used within your framework. More than happy to help on that one, and also on the other ones.
Thank you. Cecilia, you have more?
Yes, and a last one. Is there anyone on the panel who's seen some best practice examples of sustainability reporting by the public sector?
Well, I think it's pretty early days to say that there's a large swath of international good practice in sustainability reporting at this point. But what I'd suggest, at least, is looking to those early adopters who are taking a more iterative approach too. So I think that's probably something to encourage, as a bit more of a key message for everyone too, is don't go into this saying we have to have an immediate full response, but this can develop over time and will. Some of the jurisdictions where, from our global discussions, we've seen excellent progress has been in Canada, for example, where there's, I know, close work with the IPSASB already, in terms of their work on sustainability, and I think it's PSAMP is the national standard setter for public sector there. There's, for example, in the UK, there's progress being made using TCFD at the central government level as well. But yeah, that's two Anglosphere examples of this. What I'd be really keen to hear of is if there are examples that are outside of Europe or North America in that. I'm not sure if others have heard of that.
Well, I think it's exactly right. It's a case of there are some early adopters out there and iterative approaches. I think of the External Reporting Board in New Zealand as an example of that, where part of the work is applicable to the public sector. I think there are also some great practices out there that if you're thinking about the elements of sustainability reporting that we have talked about today, that it casts the net more broadly. So I think there are some excellent examples of impact reporting by Ireland on its performance report that goes to Parliament that really shows a great prioritisation of what is relevant from an impacts perspective when looking at how public resources have been spent. And I think there are some countries that have had a lot of experience with well-being frameworks and reporting on them, where sustainability is a component of them. And it might be specific measures such as climate or biodiversity or specific to sustainability, where, if you look at Ireland, Italy, that has its BES or Equitable Sustainable Wellbeing Framework, that has been around since the 90s, introduced into legislation for budgeting in 2016, and provide some examples to look at of how that's been developed. But each of these countries, I think, would be quick to shy away from the label of a best practice because of iterating and saying that they're learning that pathway as well, and keep building on it. Thanks.
Yeah, just trying to think out of box, like if you consider these voluntary national reviews that governments do for the United Nations High-Level Political Forum, it's one of these follow-up and review mechanisms of Agenda 2030. Like if you count those as sustainability reports, there might be something interesting. Like, of course, they are pretty much a kind of marketing material of the governments, but there are, for instance, some examples of this, how to consider these spillovers, these global impacts.
Singapore, they're quite far, I think, on this one.
We have a question, Thomas.
No, it's not a question. It's just responding to the question. Actually, we did a study for FOCAL, which is the Forum of Latin American Accountant Generals, for IDB, for the Inter-American Development Bank, on the current status of sustainability reporting in Latin America, which is covering 19 Latin American countries. I think, without mentioning a single country, we can report that over 80% are reporting on achievements of national plans on sustainability, and over 90% of the countries, of the 19 countries, are reporting on the achievements of SDGs. So I think it's worthwhile looking at Latin America as well. We just translated that study into English and will be publicly available shortly.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And just we're out of time for the discussion, but thank you so much to all of the panelists for joining us here today. And as you know, one of the main objectives of today's event was to help inform the IPSASB and their work. So I'd like to hand over to Ross Smith from IPSASB to just give a summary of their takeaways from today's discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks again to the panel for such a great discussion on a number of sustainability issues. I think we're all very lucky to hear the very different perspectives on sustainability from this diverse group of public sector experts. We still had lots of questions. We couldn't get them to all of them today, so I just want to hope we covered as many as possible, and we've taken note of these to take away in our work going forward. I really do think I've got a pretty tough job up here trying to put a fine point on what we've heard today. And I have to say, I'm really happy that we've recorded this event because I can see us on the staff team going back many times to various points in the panel and points that have come through the questions because there's really a lot to digest. Maybe it's a bit of an introduction for those online or for those in the room who don't know me. I'm Ross Smith and I lead the technical team in Toronto in our standard setting work. And we've been working furiously to do our financial reporting work and to start to integrate sustainability into our work going forward. And it is an area of growth for us on the staff and the board, and we're learning as we go. So it was great to hear the perspectives today of areas to think more about and areas where we need to focus. I have scribbled down a bunch of notes about takeaways from this, and I'll try and capture a few of the bigger ones that I think maybe principles or ideas that we're going to need to think about as we take forward this learning and this standard development in a new space. I think one of the key things, and it started with Olivier's introduction today, is really about the public sector really being at the forefront of action in addressing sustainability. And it's about action. It's not a reporting issue. Reporting is part of telling the story, shining a light, and providing that transparency you need to hold the public sector to account. But it's really about enabling action to address sustainability problems. And he talked about the IPCC report and the climate urgency and the issue we're up against now and how that needs to be addressed. You think about addressing that starts with the public sector. The private sector is not going to solve that issue on its own. It's the national governments that are signing the international accords. It's them that are regulating the private and the public sector. It's programs put in place by governments through budgets that we heard today that are going to put the programs in place to drive change. So without a public sector reporting solution, without public sector action, we're not going to see the change that we. Following that on, it's not just a climate problem. We heard from Lebo online today about in Africa, climate change is important, of course. But she said there's an S&G crisis at the moment that needs to be addressed. So there's much more. And we heard several times today discussions about the SDGs, which are much broader than environment. So social and governance are other priority topics that will need to be considered. So although the IPSASB does plan to start with climate, that's not the end of the journey from a standard setting perspective. We need a holistic approach to sustainability, and we need a public sector approach to underline that. So another takeaway here is the need for that global baseline, and that global baseline of reporting to be a public sector orientation framework to drive actions, to drive better behaviors of the public sector, to influence the private sector approach going forward. We also heard about other pragmatic challenges and real challenges around capacity, around the need for change management. I heard words like scalability, proportionality. I heard differential reporting. I heard being responsive. I heard don't let the goal be the enemy of what we're trying to do. So let's get started and let's get this moving. There's several important perspectives we've heard today. As I said, we'll spend a lot of time going through these tapes back on the staff as we work through taking it forward. But I'd like everybody just to give another round of applause for a great panel today, who I think really shed some light on some really important issues and will frame the IPSASB's work going forward. So maybe we just take a moment to give the panel one more round of applause. And just thanks to everyone for making this a great event. I'm going to call up Ian Crothers now for a final conclusion and thanks. And with that, over to you, Ian.
So thanks, Ross. I'd echo the thanks to the panelists and also to the questions that we've had, because I think it has been a very rich discussion, and if we were under any illusions about the complexity, but also the importance of the task confronting us, I think that was certainly dispelled today. I think, just in terms of takeaway, I think it does go back to that IPCC report that Olivier mentioned up front. And I think the absolute centrality of the actions that the public sector takes over the coming years, we've got a very short time frame to affect change. And the public sector not only needs to take the right decisions, it needs to be accountable for what is done now, not only to the current generation, but to future generations. And I think those longer time frames are going to be really important going forwards. And this is a huge issue, but I think we do have to take that longer term perspective. And one of the points I think that wasn't made today that will be important going forward is the Indigenous perspective, and they take a 7 generations perspective on this. And I think that's quite salutary to think, we're thinking today, we're thinking about what do we do now, but we need to think forward. And some of the things that we do today will have those longer term impacts. I think the other thing which today has amply shown is that in moving forward with this, the really important thing is going to be dialogue. There's a lot of people involved in this, but I think actually there's a lot of really good experience out there, and the public sector can build on that. It's not about different for being the sake of being different, but it's about actually arriving at guidance that will help governments, other public sector organisations to make change happen. And that is going to be really important. And I think that comes back to the question that Olivier raised at the beginning, is reporting the beginning or the end? I think it absolutely sits in the middle, which is, I liked Rose's answer to that, because if we don't talk to each other, there's no point in accountants developing fantastic guidance if that's not actually useful to decision makers. But as accountants and those setting standards, I think we really have to understand what's the nature of the decisions that are being made and what are the expectations in terms of accountability. So I think dialogue and events like this are going to be absolutely crucial as we move forward, and we move forward at pace. So what I would say is watch this space. I think our June meeting is going to be incredibly important in terms of the future journey. But thank you everyone for participating. Thank you to our partners, Accountancy Europe, and also to IFAC for making this event happen, and really look forward to continuing to work together going forwards. So thank you very much, everyone. And I think now there's those here in person, we're about on time, and there are drinks outside. So thank you very much, and look forward to continuing the dialogue.